How do you go from senior project director with a steady life to a 50-year-old pizza driver everyone thinks is a nobody? And how do you react when, after your ex-wife marries your billionaire boss and gets you blacklisted, an old man at the door stares at your face and calmly tells you that your father left you half of the real estate empire your boss has been milking for decades? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ethan Grant, and when all of this started, I was 48, a senior project director at a global tech firm in Chicago, married for 15 years, and stupid enough to think my life was stable. People at work called me steady, reliable, boring in a good way. I liked that. I liked procedures, clear numbers, clean code, the feeling when a system goes live and nothing crashes. At home, it was the same. Bills paid on time, mortgage under control, a quiet townhouse in a good suburb. My wife, Julia, liked to joke that she had married a human spreadsheet. I always laughed when she said it, even after it stopped sounding like a compliment. Julia was 10 years younger than me, sharp, quick with words. She worked in marketing at the same company. When we met, she said she was tired of dating boys who treated life like a game. She said I was solid, safe, the kind of man you build a future with. I believed her. I believed every late-night talk about kids we never had, every plan about early retirement, about maybe moving somewhere warmer one day. Looking back, I can see the small changes, the tiny cracks in the story I was telling myself. At the time, I just thought we were both tired. My boss then was just another name on an email. Victor Hale, founder, CEO, legend. Articles called him a visionary. The company worshipped him. There were posters of his face in the lobby with quotes about disruption and courage. I only saw him at town halls and when he walked through the engineering floor with his little crowd of vice presidents and assistants. He was in his late 50s, very white teeth, perfect hair, expensive suits that looked casual only because someone had paid a stylist to make them look that way. I never expected him to learn my name. I also never expected him to learn my wife's. The first time I saw them together was at the company's summer gala. The event was at a glass hotel downtown, the kind with a rooftop bar and views of the whole city. We were there to celebrate a record year. I had led the migration for our biggest client, a job that should have made my career bulletproof. Julia had worked on the branding campaign that made the client happy to brag about us in the press. That night, people kept clapping us on the back. The drinks were free, the music was loud. I remember feeling something close to pride. Victor came over to our table with his usual little circle around him. He talked about the project, about how we had moved the needle, about how people like us were the backbone of the company. He smiled at me, but he looked at Julia when he said it. She laughed at something he added, something I didn't quite catch. Her hand brushed his arm when she leaned forward to hear him better. It was a small movement, small enough that most people would not have noticed. I did. My brain filed it away with the same calm focus I used when tracking project risks. After that, I started seeing his name more often in Julia's stories. She said the CEO wanted input from marketing directly. She said he liked to get unfiltered feedback from people on the ground. She said it as if she was honored. I told myself it was good for her career. I told myself it meant one of us might finally move up into senior leadership. When she came home late, she said they were brainstorms, informal drinks, quick catch-ups. Nothing big, nothing to worry about. I nodded and reheated dinner. At work, things shifted in small, precise steps. My access to certain meetings changed. Initiatives I had started got moved under other managers for better alignment. A couple of younger directors suddenly became very interested in my documentation. They asked long questions about my relationships with the client, about what exactly I had promised, about where all my reports were stored. I answered everything. I had nothing to hide. I was proud of my work. But when I walked past the executive floor, the doors seemed a little more closed than before. The first real blow landed on a Wednesday morning. I still remember the time. 9:13 a.m. I had just finished my first coffee when an email popped up from HR asking me to come to a meeting at 10 hour in conference room 5B. There was no subject line beyond quick check-in. I told myself it was about bonuses, or maybe a restructuring that would finally give me a bigger team. My hands were steady when I walked into that room. They were still steady when I saw both HR and Victor sitting there. They told me the company was moving in a new direction. They said my role had evolved beyond its original design. Victor said he appreciated my years of service, but new growth required fresh energy. They used phrases like offer of separation and generous package, and opportunity to explore new challenges. HR slid a folder toward me, the way you slide a drink toward someone who is already drunk. Victor looked at his watch before I had even opened it. He said he had another call and thanked me for my contributions to the brand. Then he walked out. I sat there listening while HR explained the terms. 3 months pay, conditional references, NDA about internal processes. Something in my chest felt like it was cracking, but very quietly, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. I did not shout. I did not argue. I asked a few practical questions about health insurance and stock vesting, and I nodded when they answered. At the end, the HR director said she hoped there were no hard feelings. She said this kind of change was never personal. That was when I noticed my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was Julia. She had sent a message that said she was stuck in a meeting and would be late for lunch. I stared at the screen for a long moment. When I finally replied, I simply told her that my meeting had also run long and that we could talk tonight. I did not trust myself to say more. On the way out, I passed a group of colleagues in the hallway. They gave me quick, unsure smiles, the kind people give at funerals. No one stopped me. No one asked what had happened. They already knew. The first real public humiliation came 2 weeks later. By then, my departure had been announced in a short internal memo about strategic shifting of resources. The memo didn't mention the client I had saved from leaving last year, or the overnight migrations I had led, or the weekends I had spent in that glass box of an office. It just thanked me for my time and wished me well. I read it 3 times and then deleted it. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. The people who really knew my work would remember. I was wrong. Julia asked me to come with her to a company celebration dinner at a new restaurant on the river. She said it would look strange if she showed up alone. She said people still wanted to see me. I didn't want to go, but we were still living in the same house, still sleeping in the same bed, still pretending this was just a bump in the road, so I ironed my shirt and went. The restaurant was all glass and polished wood. Waiters moved like they were on rails. There was a long table with name cards. My name was not on any of them. I ended up at a smaller table near the back with a few old colleagues who didn't seem to know what to say to me. Up front, Victor stood to make a toast. He talked about bold leadership, about embracing the future, about leaving legacy thinking behind. People laughed. They clapped. At one point, he put a hand on Julia's shoulder and said something about the brilliant work from marketing that had made this quarter so strong. She smiled up at him in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Later that night, I went to the bar to pay our part of the bill. The bartender asked who I was with. When I pointed at the group, he nodded and said he knew Victor's people always tipped well. Then he asked if I was one of the OGs who had been there from the start. I said yes. He said he had heard Victor say something earlier about finally clearing out the dead weight. He laughed and said it was nice that the company took care of old employees with farewell dinners. I stood there with my card in my hand and felt my face go hot. In that moment, I understood something important. Victor had not just removed me, he had labeled me dead weight, legacy thinking, an old project guy who could be replaced by someone younger, hungrier, cheaper. It was an efficient way to cut me out of more than just his org chart. It cut me out of the entire industry. Who would want to hire the man the billionaire founder had publicly described as outdated? The damage became clear over the next month. Recruiters who had once begged me to consider new roles now sent polite refusals. Some did not respond at all. A friend in HR at another firm finally told me the truth. She said my name came up in a leadership call and someone mentioned that Victor had concerns about my ability to adapt. She said they didn't want to risk upsetting a man whose investments touched almost every tech company in the city. I thanked her for being honest and hung up. The night everything shifted was a Thursday. I was in the spare room, the one that used to be my home office and had somehow become the room where I kept all my boxes from work. I was scrolling through yet another rejection email when Julia came in. She said we needed to talk. She said she didn't think this marriage was working. She said she had changed, that she wanted different things now, that she couldn't spend the rest of her life with a man who refused to move forward. She did not say that she had already found someone who fit her new idea of forward, but she didn't need to. 2 weeks after she moved out, she posted pictures on social media from a private island. She was standing next to Victor, both of them in white, with flowers and champagne and a caption about second chances and finding true partnership. People from the company flooded the comments with hearts and clapping emojis. I stared at the photo until my eyes hurt. That was when my phone buzzed again with a message from her. She said she hoped I could be mature about everything. She said she and Victor wanted peace. Then she finished with a line that sat on my screen like a stain. She told me to enjoy being nobody. That line followed me into every job application, every quiet night in that empty house. It echoed when the bank explained coldly that my savings would not last forever. It was still there in the back of my mind 3 months later, on the night I opened a delivery app and filled in my details. They asked for my name, my age, my car, my driver's license. They did not ask about my years of experience, my major clients, or my old title. When I hit submit, my phone vibrated with a new notification. a map loaded, an address appeared. A little text box popped up that said a pizza place on the other side of town needed drivers and that they could start me the next day. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something cold and steady settle inside me, the same feeling I had in that restaurant when the bartender repeated Victor's words about dead weight. I picked up my keys and walked to the front door. That was the night I stepped out of my old life and into the one where I would be delivering food at 50, not knowing yet that one of those deliveries would change everything. Driving home from that first night of deliveries, I watched the city from behind a greasy windshield and felt my life shrink down to little dots on a map. The app told me where to go, when to turn, when to wait. It beeped if I sat still too long. At my old job, I had controlled whole systems. Now a phone screen controlled me. I told myself it was temporary. A few weeks to cover bills while I looked for something real. That was what I said the first week, and the second. By the third, I stopped saying anything. The work itself was simple. Pick up boxes, smile at kitchen staff who never learned my name, drive across town, smile at customers who barely looked at me, accept a tip if they felt generous, a complaint if they didn't. The hardest part wasn't the driving, it was the waiting. Waiting in lobbies, at doors, at traffic lights, with too much time to think and no way to stop. The first time I delivered to one of our old clients, I almost drove past the building. It was downtown, the same glass tower where I had sat in boardrooms arguing for infrastructure upgrades, the same lobby where their CTO had once shaken my hand and called me a lifesaver. Now I walked in holding 2 large pizzas and a plastic bag of wings. The security guard gave me a visitor sticker without looking up. Upstairs, a group of young developers sat around a table covered in energy drinks and laptops. One of them glanced at me, signed on the app, and turned back to his screen. He said the food was for a deployment party. He said their vendor had finally fixed a bunch of issues and they were pushing a big release. I asked which vendor, even though I already knew. He said my old company's name with a grin. He said their CEO was a genius for cleaning out the old guys and bringing in new blood. I set the boxes down, said I hoped everything went smoothly, and walked out before the taste in my mouth got worse. On the drive back, I thought about my father for the first time in months. My father was Thomas Grant. Most people outside our family never heard that name. In our house, it was the only name that mattered. He was a quiet man, like me. He wore the same brown jacket for almost 10 years, the elbows going thin by the time I finished high school. He smelled like paper, coffee, and 2 kinds of dust. The dust from old files in his home office and the dry city dust he brought back on his shoes from construction sites. When I was a kid, I thought he owned half the city. He would drive me around on Saturdays, pointing at different buildings and telling me stories. He would say a place used to be a bakery, now it was condos. He would say he had helped a family keep their house when a bank tried to push them out. Sometimes he would stop in front of a small brick office with a faded sign, Grant and Holloway Real Estate Holdings. The other name belonged to his business partner, an older man named David Holloway. I met him only a few times. He always seemed tired, but his eyes were sharp. They started the company in 1982, the year I was born. My father used to say we grew up together, me and the business. He kept framed photos of half-finished buildings on the wall, like proud parents hang pictures of school plays. Most of our vacations were just site visits, with ice cream added at the end. I didn't mind. I liked watching him talk to people. He listened more than he spoke. When he finally answered, people relaxed. When I turned 16, he asked if I wanted to learn the family business. He said I could help with small things, review leases, maybe take classes in finance later. I told him I wanted computers instead. I said buildings were boring and screens were exciting. He looked hurt for a second, then smiled and said he understood. He said he just wanted me to build something solid, whatever it was. He died when I was 23, heart attack in a cold parking lot outside a property he was checking on. I was in grad school, drowning in code and deadlines, when my mother called. She told me the doctors had tried. She told me the business had debts, that things had been harder than my father let on. She said there wasn't much left after hospital bills, a few small insurance payouts, the house, some boxes from his office. She told me not to worry about the details, that his partner would handle the rest. I believed her. I was young, busy, and already half out the door into my own world. I went home for the funeral, shook hands with men in suits who said my father was a good man. David Holloway came in a dark coat that looked too big on him. He told me my father was proud of me. He said something about paperwork and shares and sorting things cleanly, but those words never stuck. Afterward, my mother asked if I wanted any of Dad's files. I took a couple boxes out of guilt, shoved them in a closet in a series of apartments, and never opened them. That old cardboard followed me through my whole career, from the small first startup where I worked for stock options that never paid out, to the mid-sized company that got acquired, to Victor's empire. I always told myself I would go through those papers one day. I always had another deadline instead. Julia said she liked that I didn't talk about money much. She said she dated too many men who only wanted to brag about stocks and deals. I took that as proof that I was better than them. I told her my father had run a small real estate business, but I did not make a big deal about it. She said it was cute that I came from old-school property people, but chose tech. I didn't think about what else that business might have been. Back in the present, the years after my firing blurred together. Job applications became a routine. Tailor resume, send, wait, get silence, or a form rejection. I changed my title. I removed mentions of leading major projects under Victor. I even tried leaving the company name off, calling it simply Global SaaS Provider. It didn't help. When I did get interviews, they were polite and cold. At the end, they would say they had gone in a different direction. Sometimes they would mention cultural fit. That phrase told me more than they meant it to. One recruiter broke the pattern. We spoke on the phone about a director role at a smaller firm. It sounded perfect. Enough responsibility to use my skills, small enough that my name would matter again. He sounded excited. He said my experience was exactly what they needed. 2 days later, he called again with a different voice. He said the client had decided not to move forward. When I asked why, he hesitated, then lowered his voice. He said off the record, someone on their board knew Victor. He said Victor had mentioned that I was difficult in transition and resistant to change. He said it was not in anyone's interest to upset a key investor. He apologized. He said he hoped I understood. I told him I did. I hung up and sat very still at my kitchen table, listening to the fridge hum. That was how blacklisting felt. It wasn't loud. It was a soft door that kept closing, again and again, with a friendly smile. The house went next. The townhouse Julia and I had bought together became just another line in a divorce settlement. Her lawyer was efficient and sharp. He said my recent unemployment showed I couldn't maintain the same standard of living. He said Julia needed stability in her new life. I wanted to fight. My own lawyer, a tired man with a full desk, told me the numbers and the chances. I agreed to sell the house. After the bank took its share and fees chewed up the rest, I walked away with enough cash to pay off some debts and put a down payment on a much smaller place. I ended up in a one-bedroom apartment by the train tracks, the kind of building where you can hear your neighbor's TV and your own thoughts at the same time. The old cardboard boxes went into the bedroom closet. The top one, the heaviest, became a sort of shelf. I kept my delivery cap and insulated bag on it. Every time I grabbed them, my hand brushed the edge of the lid. I still didn't open it. By the time I turned 50, I had stopped thinking in birthdays. I thought in bills, rent due date, phone plan renewal, car insurance, gas. The app kept me moving. I drove in sun, in rain, in snow. I learned which buildings had slow elevators, which streets flooded when it stormed, which doormen liked small talk. Sometimes I caught glimpses of my old world. A company logo on a meeting room through glass. A familiar face crossing a lobby without seeing me. One night, I delivered to a condo tower with a valet out front and a marble lobby. The kind of place where the parking spots cost more than my car. As I walked in, carrying 2 large pizzas that smelled like garlic and money, I saw a photo on the wall near the mailboxes. It showed the building when it first opened years ago, with a ribbon cutting and 2 men holding oversized scissors. I recognized one of them without effort. It was Victor, younger, with less gray and the same smile. The other was an older man with a cane and tired eyes that still seemed sharp. The plaque said the development had been a joint project between Hale Capital and Grant and Holloway Properties. Seeing my own last name there, carved in metal, felt like someone had dropped a stone into my stomach. For a second, I thought it had to be another Grant. A coincidence. Then I looked closer at the older man's face. The nose, the line of the jaw. It looked too much like my father to be random. I stood there with a pizza box in my hands and my cap crooked on my head, staring at that photo until the front desk clerk coughed and told me the elevator was on my left. That night, in my apartment, I took one of my father's boxes out of the closet. I set it on the table and just looked at it. The tape was old, yellow at the edges. His handwriting was on the side in faded marker. Client files, 80s, limited. I put my hand on the lid. Then my phone buzzed with another order, and I pulled back. Rent did not care about old papers. I pushed the box aside and went back to work. A few days later, the app sent me into a neighborhood I had never delivered to before. The streets were wide and lined with old trees. The houses were big, but not flashy, the kind of money that had nothing left to prove. The pin on the map settled over a long driveway that led to a stone house with a deep porch and a light burning in the front window. I parked at the curb and checked the order. 1 large pizza, extra cheese, no contact delivery requested. The customer's name was D. Holloway. My thumb hovered over the screen. I looked up at the house again. There was something about the shape of it, the way the roofline sat, that tugged at an old memory of sitting in my father's car while he pointed at blueprints. I walked up the path, the box warm in my hands, my heart suddenly louder than the crickets. At the door, I rang the bell and stepped back like the app told me to. From inside, I heard slow footsteps, then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a few inches, and an old man's voice came through, careful and rough, asking for my name. I told him. There was a pause. Then the door opened wider, and I saw a pair of eyes studying my face like I was a ghost. The old man said my full name slowly, as if testing it. Then he said another name I had not heard spoken in years, my father's. The old man said my father's name like it was fragile. Then he said mine again, slower, checking the way it sat in the air. Ethan Grant, as if he was lining it up with an old memory. He asked if my father was Thomas Grant. I nodded because my mouth did not seem ready yet. He stared at me for a long moment. His eyes were cloudy, but the color was the same sharp gray I remembered from a few blurry childhood afternoons in a cramped office that smelled like coffee and paper. He pushed the door open wider and told me to come in. His voice was thin, but there was no hesitation in it. I stepped over the threshold, still holding the pizza box like a shield. The hallway inside was lined with framed photos. Some were family pictures, some were buildings. I recognized a few from my father's old stories, only now they were lit at dusk and edited for brochures. Glass towers, renovated warehouses, rows of townhomes that all looked expensive. He led me to a sitting room with heavy furniture that looked older than both of us. He told me to put the pizza on the coffee table. Then he stood there with his hand on the back of a chair and just looked at my face. He said it again, that I looked exactly like Thomas did in his 30s. He said my father used to stand in front of a whiteboard in their office with the same deep lines between his eyebrows when he was concentrating. He said he had not heard my name in nearly 30 years. He asked why I was delivering pizza. I told him it was a long story. He said he had time. Then his knees shook a little, and he sat down with a small curse under his breath. That was the first thing that felt normal. Old men and their joints. I sat in the chair across from him and took my cap off. My hair had more gray in it than I liked to admit. For the first time, I wondered what my father would have looked like at my age if his heart had not given out in a parking lot. The old man finally introduced himself. He said his name was David Holloway. He watched my face when he said it. I knew the name, but only as letters on old labels. The faded sign outside my father's office, the header on files and boxes that had followed me through a dozen apartments, the metal plaque under the photo in that condo lobby. Hearing it out loud made something shift in my chest. He asked if my mother was still alive. I said no, she had passed 5 years ago in a small hospice room with bad art on the walls. He nodded like that matched what he had expected. He asked if I had ever gotten his letters. I asked what letters. He let out a breath that sounded heavier than any sigh I had heard in a long time. He said after my father's funeral he had tried to keep the business together. He said the world was changing by then, that the banks wanted software models and hedge fund partners, not 2 middle-aged men with paper ledgers and land instincts. He said a man named Hale came in with bright young associates and thick folders. He did not have to say the first name. I knew it. He said Hale Capital made an offer. They wanted a piece of Grant and Holloway. They promised scale, leverage, access to projects the two of them could never reach alone. They said the old way of doing things was over. My father, he told me, agreed to a partnership, but insisted on keeping control of the company that held their properties. Half of the shares stayed with Grant and Holloway Holdings. The other half sat with their new capital partners. It was complicated on paper, he said, with layers of shells and joint ventures, but simple in principle. 2 men who knew property and 1 man who knew money would grow something together. By the time my father died, that structure had spread roots into almost everything they built. Holloway's voice went softer when he said that part. He talked about how he and my father had argued about risk, about projects, about whether to sell certain buildings. He said they had never argued about one thing, that the company they built together belonged to both families. He said my father had insisted his shares go to me one day. I told him no one had ever said anything about that to me. I told him my mother had said there were debts, nothing more. He closed his eyes like someone had flicked a switch off behind them. He said after my father died, he had asked his lawyers to contact the estate. He said they had drawn up notices, letters, documents that explained the structure, the shares, the rights. He said those documents went to my mother's address, the one they had on record from years before. He said everything came back either unanswered or formally declined. At some point, he said, a different law firm appeared, one he did not know. They said they represented my mother and that she wanted everything simplified. They said she did not want exposure to property risk, that she preferred a clean payout. He said he had felt uneasy but had been tired and grieving and overworked. He said he had signed an agreement that moved my father's interest into a trust vehicle. He said the trust listed me as beneficiary. He said the holding company records still showed a block of shares reserved for E. Grant heir, held in proxy by a trustee firm. Then he looked at my delivery jacket, the worn logo, the cheap stitching, and shook his head. I asked him if he was sure. He said he was old but not senile. He said he had asked for updates every few years. The answers he told me always said the same thing. Beneficiary unreachable, proxy voting rights in place, no change. He said after a while, Hale's people told him not to worry about it, that they had everything under control. They said my father's part was just a legacy footnote now. He leaned forward then, his hands gripping his knees, and told me something that made my throat tighten. He said he had apologized to my father in his head every day for 20 years because the world they had built together had been swallowed by bigger mouths while he watched from the inside. He said seeing my face at his door in a pizza cap felt like a bad joke. I asked him what the company was worth now. I did not fully understand the structures or the shells, but I knew enough to know that many of the buildings on his walls had been leveraged into something big. He didn't answer right away. He pushed himself up with effort and shuffled over to a small desk by the window. He turned on an old computer, the kind with a loud fan. The boot-up noise filled the room. He told me he checked the numbers sometimes when he could not sleep. Not for himself, he said, but because he liked to know that the places he and my father had bought when they were empty and broken were still standing. He opened a browser slowly, his hands trembling a little on the mouse. He clicked through a series of bookmarks and login screens. I watched the reflection of the monitor in the glass cabinet near his desk. I saw a chart, some rows of numbers, a logo I recognized from that condo lobby plaque. I did not need to see every detail. The shape of the graph was enough. It went up and to the right, steep and steady. He said softly that if my father's original shares and their offspring had been left untouched, the value attached to my name would not fit in my current glove compartment. He did not say the number. He did not have to. I could feel its weight in the silence between us. I sat there, hands on my thighs, feeling like the air had turned thick. For years I had told myself I was nobody, that Victor's word had made it true. Here, in a room full of photos of buildings my father once walked through in dusty boots, an old man was telling me that my name had been on something big the whole time. Not as a gift, not as a lottery, but as inheritance from a man who had planned ahead while I was too busy chasing other dreams. I asked where my mother fit into all that. He said he had seen her exactly twice after the funeral. Once at a meeting in a lawyer's office, where she looked tired and small and signed papers with a shaking hand. Again a year later, when she came by the old office to say she wanted to move on and not hear about any more complicated business things. He said she had seemed scared of something, but it had not been him. He had tried to talk to her about keeping some direct stake. The lawyers with her had shut that down fast. He did not use Victor's name, but we both heard it in the word lawyers. I saw my ex-wife's honeymoon photo in my mind. The private island, the white outfits, the man beside her whose money came from a world that had swallowed my father's work and left me with nothing but boxes. Holloway watched my face as I put those pieces together. He said he was not accusing anyone of anything illegal because he did not have proof. He said what he had were memories, a few old letters, and a gut feeling that somewhere along the way someone had decided it was easier if the grant simply vanished from the story. He said he was dying. He said his doctors had been honest with him. Time was short. He said he had started putting his own affairs in order. He had children of his own, grandchildren too. He had made sure they were taken care of. But this, he said, pointing vaguely in the direction of the computer screen, this piece with my name on it still bothered him. He said he had told his attorney that if I ever showed up, he wanted it to be corrected. I asked what he meant by corrected. He said that was for lawyers and judges and auditors, not for two old men in a living room to decide. Then he corrected himself and said one old man and, in his words, one stubborn, middle-aged boy who looked too tired for his age. He told me to find a good attorney, someone hungry and not afraid of big names. He said I should not sign anything new until I understood exactly what was already attached to my name. We sat in silence for a while after that. The pizza on the table had gone cold. At some point he laughed softly and said he had forgotten about his dinner. He opened the box, took one slice, and told me to take the rest. I told him it was on the house. It was the only payment I could offer. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door as far as his legs allowed. His hand shook when he set it on my shoulder. He said he was sorry. I asked what for. He said for not fighting harder when the first papers came across his desk with my name spelled wrong and my contact box marked unreachable. He said he had been tired and had believed men in expensive suits who said they were taking care of things. On the drive back to my apartment, the delivery app kept beeping with new orders. I ignored them, one after another, my earnings for the night shrinking on the screen. The city lights blurred past. My father's voice, my mother's silence, Victor's smirk, Julia's text about enjoying being nobody, all of it pressed in on me. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a man who had been hit twice by the same car without seeing it coming. Once when Victor had fired and blacklisted me. A second time when an old partner told me my father had left me more than I ever knew and that someone had conveniently made that information hard to reach. Back in my apartment, I went straight to the bedroom closet. The old boxes were stacked in the corner like they always were. I pulled the heaviest one out, the one with my father's handwriting on the side. I carried it to the kitchen table and cut through the dry tape with a dull knife. The smell that came out was dust and paper and something else I could not name. I lifted the lid. On top lay a thick manila folder with a tab. My father's neat block letters spelled out a title I had seen only once before, on a metal plaque in a condo lobby and in the reflection of an old man's computer screen. Grant and Holloway Holdings, Share Ledger and Agreements. My phone buzzed on the table right beside it. The screen lit up with an unknown number and the city code from downtown. I looked from the folder to the phone, my hand hovering between them, feeling that same cold, steady clarity settle into place that had started in a gym lobby, a restaurant bar, and now an old man's living room. I let the phone ring one more time before I reached for it. The number on my phone had a downtown prefix. I answered anyway. At that point, I had more to lose by ignoring calls than by taking them. A calm woman's voice asked if she was speaking with Ethan Grant. I said yes. She introduced herself as Laura Chen, an attorney. She said she represented David Holloway. She said David had called her after I left his house. He had told her it was finally time to deal with the Grant matter. She asked if I could come to her office the next afternoon. She said it was important that we speak in person. Her tone was steady, the way doctors sound when they already know your test results. I agreed and wrote down the address on the back of an old delivery receipt. After the call, I sat at the table staring at the folder in front of me. Part of me wanted to dig through every page that night. Another part knew I should not step into something this big without a guide. In the end, I did what I always did when life got complicated. I went to work. The app beeped. I put my cap back on and drove. Laura's office was in a mid-rise building of glass and stone, the kind of place you only enter if you have business there. I felt the delivery driver in me flinch when I walked past the coffee shop in the lobby without a bag in my hand. The elevator took me to the 12th floor, where the carpet was thick and the air smelled like paper and printer toner. Her door had her name on it in neat metal letters. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and a suit that looked like it fit her life perfectly. She shook my hand and studied my face the way David had, like she was matching it to someone from an old photo. She said David had told her about my father, about the company they built, about the trust that was supposed to hold his shares for me. She said she had looked into the records again that morning. She said the structure was complex, but one thing was simple. On paper, I was still listed as the beneficial owner of a block of shares in a holding company that sat under most of Hale Capital's real estate assets. She did not slide any documents across the table. She kept her hands folded. She told me the paperwork existed, that she had copies, that the numbers were large enough to make people nervous. She also said we were not here to get excited. We were here to get precise. She asked what I remembered about my father's business. I told her about the old office, the site visits, the boxes in my closet. I told her what David had told me the night before. I told her my mother had never mentioned any trust or shares, only debts. I heard my own voice stay flat even when I spoke about the years since Victor fired me. It felt like I was giving a report at my old job. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something I did not expect. She said what happened to my career mattered for what we were about to do. She said if we could show a pattern of Victor cutting me out while still using my father's legacy, it would not look good for him in any setting. She laid out the situation in simple terms. There was a holding company with my father's name on its history. That company owned pieces of many buildings and projects. My father's interest had been moved into a trust after he died. The trust named me as beneficiary. A corporate trustee had been voting those shares for decades, often in line with Hale Capital's wishes. At no point, as far as she could see, had anyone provided me with a full accounting. I asked if that was legal. She said it depended. She said trustees had duties. They were supposed to act in the best interest of the beneficiary, not the people who hired them. She said if the trustee firm had allowed my stake to be treated as a silent rubber stamp to make someone else rich while I delivered food for a living, that could be a problem for them. She advised me to do a few things right away. She said I should not contact Victor or Julia directly about this. She said I should not sign anything from anyone connected to them. She said I should keep working, keep my life looking normal from the outside, and start organizing everything I had from my father. She said her firm would send formal requests to the trustee for a full accounting of the trust and to the holding company for access to shareholder records. She said we would see how they responded before deciding on the next step. She used the phrase, escalate through proper channels. I liked that. It sounded like a project plan. On my way out, she asked one more thing. She asked if I still had my exit paperwork from Victor's company, the severance documents, any emails about my departure. I told her they were in a drawer somewhere. She said I should find them and keep them safe. She said they might matter later. Back at my apartment, I opened my father's box for real this time. I did not read every page. I just sorted. Purchase agreements in one pile, old correspondence in another. At the bottom, under a stack of yellowed financial statements, I found a thicker bundle with a rubber band around it. The top page was a cover letter from a law firm I did not recognize, addressed to my mother. My father's name was in the subject line next to words like estate and holdings. I did not read further. I took my phone out and snapped photos of the front pages of everything that looked important, then backed those up to a cloud account with a password only I knew. If I had learned anything in tech, it was that data you do not copy is data you are going to lose. That week, my days split in half. Daylight hours were for deliveries, night hours were for paper. I would drive past buildings my father once pointed at and deliver hot food to people inside, then go home and spread cold facts across my kitchen table. I drew a timeline on a notepad, starting in 1982 when my father and David opened their first office. I marked the year I was born, the year my father died, the year Hale Capital appeared, the year Victor took our tech company public, the year he fired me and married my ex-wife. There were more overlaps than I wanted to see. Laura called 2 days later. She said they had sent the first letters. She said the trustee firm had responded quickly, saying they would be happy to provide a summary statement, and that the trust was small and inactive. She said that word inactive made her eyebrows go up. She said the holding company had not answered yet. She said that silence told its own story. She also said something else. Someone from Hale Capital's legal team had called her partner. They had asked casually if one of their clients was stirring up old ghosts about Grant and Holloway. They had suggested a friendly meeting to clear up misunderstandings before things got messy. Laura said she had agreed to a meeting, but only in a conference room with notes and witnesses. She asked if I would be willing to attend. I said yes. The day of the meeting, I wore the same suit I had worn to my last performance review before Victor cut me loose. It felt tighter around the middle now, but it still closed. Hale Capital's office was higher than Laura's, with wider glass and quieter carpets. Their logo was etched into a stone wall behind the reception desk. The woman at the desk smiled at Laura and me the way flight attendants smile during turbulence. They led us to a conference room with a view of the river. Victor was not there. Instead, 2 lawyers in tailored suits waited with their tablets. One introduced himself as general counsel. The other did not bother with titles. They said they understood there was some confusion about legacy holdings from an old partnership. They said they valued transparency. They said they were surprised that David Holloway had involved outside counsel instead of coming directly to them. Laura spoke first. She said we were simply asking for information about a trust, nothing more. She said I was entitled to an accounting. She said we had reason to believe the value involved might be significant. The general counsel smiled and said words like misalignment of expectations and historic paperwork. He said my father's interest had been largely wiped out by debts and restructurings over the years. He said anything left would be a token amount. He turned to me and asked why I was suddenly interested now. He did not say it, but the tone suggested an opportunist chasing a payday. I thought about my delivery jacket, my apartment by the tracks, the way Victor's word had shadowed every job application. I also thought about my father in a cheap brown jacket, standing in the cold wind in front of half-built buildings. I told him calmly that I was interested because no one had ever told me the trust existed. I said I wanted to see the records for myself. I said if there was nothing there, fine, I would accept it. If there was something, I expected it to be handled properly. My voice did not go up. It did not shake. Years of status meetings and bad news had trained it well. The second lawyer spoke then. He said they wanted to be helpful. He said dragging everyone into formal proceedings would only enrich attorneys. He suggested Hale Capital could offer me a goodwill payment to close the trust and clear their books. He mentioned a number in a flat tone. It was not small in everyday terms. It was a few years of comfortable living. It was also the kind of amount a firm like theirs might spend on a holiday party. Laura did not even look at me before she answered. She said no. She said we were not negotiating a settlement without seeing an accounting. She said if they were so certain the trust was worthless, they should have no problem opening their books. The room got a little colder after that. The general counsel's smile got thinner. He said they would consider our request and respond through proper channels. He also said, almost as an afterthought, that stirring up old structures could have unintended consequences for everyone. He let that hang in the air. It was the kind of line that was meant to sound like concern, but felt like a warning. On the way down in the elevator, Laura said something that surprised me. She said their behavior made her feel better. She said if there truly was nothing there, they would have given us the accounting on the spot and sent us away. She said fear did not wear a tailored suit, but it leaked through in small ways, like the way the second lawyer's pen had tapped faster when she refused their offer. That night, I had a run of deliveries in the same part of town where our old tech office stood. I drove past the building out of habit, even though I had no reason to be there. The lights on the upper floors glowed against the dark. As I sat at a red light, I saw two figures through the glass in the lobby. Victor was hard to miss. Even from across the street, his posture was the same, head tipped slightly back, smile just wide enough for cameras. Next to him, Julia stood in a pale coat. She laughed at something he said and touched his arm, her hand resting exactly where I had seen it the night of that summer gala years before. They did not see me. I was just another car in a line, a delivery bag on the passenger seat, a number on a license plate. For a moment, the old humiliation burned hot. Fired, discarded, erased. Enjoy being nobody. Then my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Laura. She said she had just received an email from Hale Capital's outside counsel. They had refused to provide a full accounting at this time. They had also informed her that the board of the holding company connected to Grant & Holloway would be convening a special session to address legacy ownership matters in 4 weeks. She forwarded me a screenshot of the email header. I saw the subject line. It listed the date, the company name, and 2 words that made the air around me feel still. Shareholder session. The light turned green. The cars behind me honked. I drove on, the city sliding past, knowing that for the first time in a long time, there was a date on a calendar where Victor and his people would have to say my name out loud in a room that actually counted. In the 4 weeks before the shareholder session, my life narrowed down to 3 things: driving, sorting, and waiting. During the day, I still delivered food. The app did not care that some holding company's board was about to say my name. It just pinged when orders were ready. I still drove past buildings my father had once pointed at, still walked through lobbies carrying cardboard boxes instead of project binders. I smiled at receptionists who did not look twice at me, but at night, my apartment turned into something closer to a war room. Laura had given me a simple list: gather everything, change nothing, send copies only. I spread my father's papers across the table and floor, sticky notes everywhere. Contracts, letters, tax filings, bank statements, minutes from meetings I had never known existed. Each document smelled faintly of old coffee and time. I found a binder from the year I graduated college. Inside were typed minutes from a Grant & Holloway board meeting. One line mentioned Hale Capital joining as a strategic partner. Another, in my father's handwriting in the margin, said something about never giving up control without a clear exit. I took a photo of that, sent it to Laura, and watched the little delivered indicator appear like a tiny check mark in the dark. Laura brought in other people, too. She said we needed numbers we could trust. One afternoon, I sat in a small conference room with a forensic accountant named Ravi. He wore a suit that looked cheaper than Laura's, but his eyes were brutal. He had spread printouts over the table, lines of figures highlighted in different colors. He pointed to one set and said it showed how the holdings had grown over 30 years. Another set showed management fees paid to entities connected to Hale Capital. Another showed adjustments that always seemed to reduce the trust's reported value at key times. He said he could not say yet that anything illegal had occurred. He could say that the trust's share of profits looked suspiciously thin compared to its ownership percentage. He could say someone had been very creative with accounting. He said auditors and regulators did not like creativity when it hid in footnotes. While he talked, I kept thinking about my father's brown jacket and the way he would clip coupons at the kitchen table. Knowing that numbers like this had been circling his name while he worried about grocery prices made the air feel heavier. Laura's firm began sending more letters, formal demands, requests for records, notices of potential breaches of duty. She copied me on everything. Sometimes the replies came back quickly, full of polite language that said nothing. Sometimes they did not come at all. Hale Capital's side tried a different approach. One evening, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. No logo, just my name printed neatly. Inside was a letter from a law firm I recognized from my severance paperwork, and a document labeled Mutual Release and Settlement Agreement. The letter said they understood there had been some confusion about a small legacy interest. It said their client wanted closure. It said, in careful lines, that in exchange for a lump sum payment, I would agree that I had no further claims against Hale Capital, the holding company, the trustee, or any related parties. The payment number was larger than the goodwill offer at the earlier meeting. For most of my life, it would have looked like a fortune. I took a photo of the first page and texted it to Laura without signing anything. A minute later, my phone rang. Her calm voice sounded slightly sharper than usual. She told me not to answer any letters directly. She told me to bring the originals to her office the next day. She said the new amount only confirmed what she already suspected. My stake was worth much more. As we dug deeper, other patterns emerged. Old emails from my time at Victor's tech company showed him talking about leveraging our real estate network for favorable leases. A lease contract Laura found through public records showed our office building was owned by a shell company sitting under the same holding structure as the properties my father had invested in. I had spent years walking on floors my father's company partly owned without knowing it. Laura had me write a statement about my firing, my job search, the comments recruiters had passed along about Victor calling me resistant to change. She told me to stick to facts, dates, names, exact phrases, no opinions, no guesses. She said the board would care more about patterns than feelings. David Holloway's health slipped in the background of all this. When I visited, some days he looked sharp, joking about the taste of hospital food. Other days, his eyes were far away. Laura arranged for him to give a recorded statement while he was still strong enough. I was there for that. The room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. A small camera sat on a tripod at the foot of his bed. Laura asked him questions in a steady voice. He answered with surprising force. He talked about my father, about their partnership, about the trust structuring. He described meetings with Hale's people, their pressure to simplify, their insistence that my mother did not want to be involved. He said he had felt pushed aside. At one point, his voice shook, and he apologized again to me, right on camera, for not fighting harder. Laura did not interrupt. When they finished, she checked the recording twice before turning off the camera. When I drove home afterward, the city felt different. The streets were the same, the buildings were the same. But somewhere in a law firm's server, there now existed a video of an old man saying words that could crack open 3 decades of quiet arrangements. Julia reached out too, once the first ripples started. I got a text from an unknown number one night while I was waiting in a restaurant parking lot. The message said she had heard I was stirring things up with Victor's business. She said this was pointless, and I would only embarrass myself. She said it would be better for everyone if I signed whatever they offered and moved on. I stared at her words through the reflection of heat lamps in the restaurant window. Then I typed a short reply. I told her that any communication about legal matters should go through my lawyer. I added one line at the end. I said I hoped she enjoyed being married to somebody who was about to explain to a board why he had hidden somebody else's inheritance. I deleted that last sentence before sending. Instead, I sent only the part about my lawyer. Old habits, politeness, restraint, held on tight. But inside, something had shifted from wounded to resolved. Laura started talking about strategy for the session. She explained that a special shareholder and board session was not a public spectacle. It would be a closed room. But in that room, the rules were clear. Certain votes required certain thresholds. Shareholders had rights to information and to fair treatment. Trustees could not just pretend beneficiaries did not exist. She planned to bring 3 things: David's recorded statement, Ravi's analysis, and a stack of documents from my father's box showing original agreements. She would not drop them all at once. She would walk the board through a timeline: creation of the company, entrance of Hale Capital, creation of the trust, my father's death, my absence from all decision-making afterward. She told me my role was simple: tell my story when asked, stay calm, answer questions directly, let the evidence do the heavy lifting. She said people like Victor expected anger from men they thought they had crushed. They did not expect steady, documented pressure. The night before the session, I did not work. I turned off the delivery app and put my phone face down on the table. I took my suit out of the closet and ironed it slowly. The jacket was still tight around the middle, but it buttoned. I set my father's old binder on the table and rested my hand on it. I remembered him telling me, when I was a teenager complaining about math homework, that numbers were just another way of telling a story. He said if you followed them long enough, they showed you who had kept their word and who had not. In the morning, the city looked almost gentle through the train window. I had decided not to drive. I wanted to arrive with my head clear, not filled with traffic and parking. The holding company's building was smaller than Hale Capital's tower, but older, with stone columns and brass handles polished by decades of hands. In the lobby, a receptionist checked our names against a list. Laura was already there, carrying a slim briefcase. Her expression was calm but focused. A man with a camera hung back near the far wall, pretending to check his phone. Laura noticed him and leaned close, saying she had not invited press, but rumors traveled fast. A side door opened. An assistant in a dark suit said the board was ready. I could hear the low murmur of voices coming from down the hall, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of chairs. Somewhere in that room, Victor would be sitting, expecting another easy meeting where his word closed doors and decided outcomes. Laura looked at me and asked if I was ready. I realized I was, not because I felt brave, but because I was tired of being the man other people erased. We walked toward the conference room. As we reached the doorway, I heard the faint click of a recording device being turned on and the chairperson clearing their throat to start the session. Then the heavy door swung inward, and we stepped through as it closed softly behind us. The boardroom was long glass, dark wood, and expensive silence. Victor sat near the chairperson, relaxed, one arm over the back of his chair. He gave me a quick, amused glance like I was a minor HR issue. The chair asked why we were there. Laura started with dates. She laid down my father's original partnership agreement, 50% to Grant and Holloway. She laid down the trust document naming me beneficiary. She read the clause about fiduciary duty out loud. Then she played David Holloway's recorded statement, his voice thin but clear, describing pressure, simplification, my name marked unreachable while votes were quietly cast. Ravi spoke next. He showed 3 pages. Not everything, just enough. Project returns, trust percentage, payouts that made no sense. He used phrases like systematic underallocation and pattern inconsistent with arm's-length dealing. The room changed. 2 directors looked furious. One asked why they had never been told a Grant heir still existed. Victor tried to smooth it over. Legacy structure, immaterial amounts, unfortunate miscommunications. Laura let him finish, then mentioned regulators, trustee liability, and my willingness to pursue discovery. The chairperson asked if I wanted to say anything. I told him about the blacklisting, the rejections, the delivery routes through buildings my father partly owned. I kept it short. Facts only. The board recessed. When they returned, the chair read their resolution. Full accounting, immediate suspension of the trustee, referral to outside auditors, and recognition of me as beneficial owner of my father's stake with voting rights effective today. Victor was to step down from the holding company pending review. His lawyer whispered. Victor went pale. The chair slid a stack of papers toward me and asked me to sign. For years, Victor's word had quietly closed doors in my face. That afternoon, without raising my voice, I signed my name on the documents that took his hand off my family's company. He had to stand, collect his things, and walk out past my chair. No one followed him.